Well, hello there, Grandmasters. Mike from the WCA. How's everybody doing? A little week 5 update for you, 2 o'clock class. I want to take a look at a game between Daniel and Eric that was played this past Sunday. I like the game because it highlighted one of the problems that we all have at this level, and that is basically once the opening is done, what are we supposed to do? And I want you to focus on a couple of ideas as I go through this game. One, I want you to be aware of when it's time to change the pawn structure. And I also want you to pay very close attention to when it's time to improve a piece. And I'll talk more about what those two things mean. Let's take a look at a few more moves and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so from this position, it's Daniel to move with white, and he plays a kind of funny move on move 2. He plays pawn to d3. And the reason we say it's funny is if you go back, you'll see that the light squared bishop has an open diagonal. So most players in this position will play a move like knight f3 to attack the pawn, a move like knight c3, or even develop this bishop on move 2, which is perfectly fine to do. When you play d3 on move 2, you're basically telling this bishop it's going to take a while to get into the game. It's certainly not bad. Like, white doesn't lose here, but you're kind of limiting the scope of this piece. And I'm not talking about the mouthwash scope. I'm talking about the ability to see. You know, words like telescope, microscope, periscope, they all have something in common. Anyway, it means your ability to see. Black to play. Eric plays knight f6. Knight f3, so these are kind of standard developing moves now. Knight c6. I like white's next move, bishop to g5. So they're following the principles of the opening. We've discussed these in class. All the minor pieces get put into play. Use the center pawns. Take care of your king. That's basically what the opening is about. And once your king is secure and the minor pieces are out, the end game, the middle game is about to take place. Okay, so here there's still a little bit of work to do. We're definitely still in the opening. So bishop to e7. Could it have come out more? Yeah, it could have. But I like black's move. I think black was concerned with this pin. You know, the knight is not being able to move because of this bishop here. So he just gets rid of that problem once and for all with bishop to e7. Knight c3. And now d6. So it's funny, both players locked in their king's bishops, but again, it's perfectly playable. There's really nothing wrong with what either player is doing. So bishop e2 to develop, bishop e6 to develop, and now queen to d2. And this is the first part of the game where I want to stop and have a little bit of a think here. Let's go back to Eric's last move, bishop to e6. Okay, it's white to play. It's so hard sometimes in chess games to find moves and positions once the pieces get developed. If you look here, it's very natural for white to just castle. Perfectly fine to do that. But I think here is an opportunity for white to change the structure. And what do I mean by that? Pretty much changing the way or the shape of the pawns. So here white has a pawn break, and a pawn break by definition is when you find two pawns on the board, this pawn here, that are bumping heads. And a pure pawn break takes place when you attack your partner's pawn from the side. And why do I say a pure pawn break? Well, if you can imagine there's no white pawn here, if you try to run here and offer a trade to me, if I wasn't crazy about making that trade, I might be able to run by your pawn. That's why it's important to notice when you see two pawns that are locked like this, because if you break from the side, your opponent will not have a choice but to either let you take them, you're going to take them, or they're going to push past. But once that break happens, the other person really can't do much about the pawns trading, because if white wants to trade, they're going to trade. Now, what do pawn breaks do for you? Well, let's look at a simple capture. Let's just say Daniel broke with d4 and Eric took. We could take with the knight, And if you continue to trade, you get this position, which can lead to a much more exciting game because white has the option of castling queenside now. That's number one. After the break, there is now a half open file for each player. So pause your video. Hopefully you guys know how to stop these videos. Pause the video and name the half open files. Okay, I hope you found the D file is half open for white, and the E file is half open for black. And when they say half open, it means only one team has a pawn on it. But it also means that if you're the one that puts a rook there, you'll get the most use out of it. If white puts a rook here someday with his own pawn in the way, the rook won't be as effective. If there is no pawn of your color on that line, after you castle, the rook will be a little more effective here. And you should see that white will be a better place to put a rook on the D line because they don't have a pawn there. So with those simple little trades, you'll see the opportunity to castle on either side for white and the existence of half open files now. If you go back to the game after this move, you'll see that there are no open files. So changing the structure to open a file is an excellent tool to put in your bank to play the middle game. Now you could argue with me and say, hey, this is not a middle game. The white king hasn't castled, the black king hasn't castled. Well, like I've said in other videos, there's no exact time when the middle game starts. Here, since all of the minor pieces are developed, you're pretty much getting done with the opening and getting ready for some middle game ideas. And that's really where pawn breaks shine the most, in the middle game. In endgames with just rooks on the board and other types of endings, you certainly do see pawn breaks. But when pawn breaks happen when you have most of your pieces on the board, they're really effective because if the lines open up, you have your whole team to participate. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, let me show you what Daniel did. He played queen to d2. This is a perfectly fine move. It's flexible. A lot of players have been taught to connect the rooks. You may have heard about that idea. So if you play queen to d2 and then castle on either side, your rooks will be connected. And I apologize about that whistling. You ever hear when I drop a piece down, it sounds like a tea kettle? Yeah, it's just chest space. It makes these wacky sounds sometimes. Okay, now, another important moment in the game. Once the middle game starts, or when you're in a position where you feel you're not quite sure what to do, changing the structure is clearly an idea. And we saw that white had the opportunity to do that with the move d4. It turns out here, black has an opportunity to change something else, not the structure, but the placement of one of the minor pieces. A lot of masters call that improving a piece. Now you can improve your queen, your rook, you can even improve your king. In a lot of endgames you'll hear or read about writers saying, hey, white just improved their king. Well, in this position, black could improve one of his pieces, and it looks like he tried to do it. It's this knight here on c6. But here, instead of the game continuation, maybe you could jump that knight right into the center. And this is kind of a cool idea. If I take you, you take back, this pawn can be really annoying here. But what that trade did, aside from attacking the knight here, it starts to create tactics already. That simple trade, because you have to watch, if this knight were to jump out of the way, this bishop up here would be attacked twice by the queen and bishop battery. It makes for a real exciting game. Maybe to avoid that, white might take first, and then it gives black an opportunity to make a mistake. For example, you could take my knight first, thinking that, well, before I take the bishop, I'll take the knight, attack the queen, but that's a mistake, because you can't forget about this bishop swooping back down picking up the pawn, and in this position, white is up a clean pawn. And I'm going to put that in the questions in the blog. What is a clean pawn? I mean, did the pawn get dirty? Did it fall in the mud and you cleaned it up? Is that what we're talking about? No. A clean pawn basically means you're up a pawn and your opponent has nothing to show for it. I could be down a pawn, but I have a rook on an open file and a very powerful knight, for example. In this position, black is just down a pawn. Now, how did all these tactics start? And believe me, there's a lot more in that position. I'm just showing you some basics. How did it start? It starts when black decides to improve a piece by centralizing the knight. So the knight on c6 hops into the middle, offering white a trade. Now look, white doesn't have to trade, but if white doesn't trade, white has to deal with this knight attacking all these wonderful squares in their territory. If you do trade, then you have to deal with the fact that this pawn is attacking your knight and you have to handle it correctly. You know, maybe you could take here first and then white will hop the knight into the middle. Now check out this position. What if black takes the knight and you take back? Isn't that bizarre? There's a white pawn, a black pawn, a white pawn, a black pawn. It's like a tree of multicolored pawns, and that really changes the shape of this game, doesn't it? Look at the two bishops. They're on opposite colors. So this guy here can possibly defend the two white pawns in the middle with these two moves, right? And the same is true for black. Black can put the bishop here or here and guard their pawns. It's going to make for a pretty interesting game. And again, how did all of this start? By just centralizing the knight. Here it is. But that's not what happened in the game. Daniel decided to move the knight all the way back. And his idea was to push the c pawn here to get power over the d4 square and then bring the knight back. Whenever you see your opponent backtrack with a knight, unless it was forced to do so, see if you can take advantage of the fact that the knight is kind of quiet. Well, change the structure. Maybe you could play the move, you guessed it, d4 in this position. Why not? Open up the game. d4 is white. Keep in mind, if there's ever a trade and you take with your knight the way you just did here, just compare the two knights that have just moved. I'll highlight them. The knight here on b8, the knight here on d4. It's clear that the white knight is much stronger. Now, once that happens, here white has more options than black. White might want to take the bishop on e6 at some point, and once they did, if you look at what would be left, white would have the two bishops. So by making this first trade, it would give you an opportunity to go for the two bishops and then continue to open the game up for those pieces. Black doesn't have the same power because when that knight went backwards, he lost some central control. What he did in the game, though, after the knight went to b8, is he played rook a to b1. Now, as soon as he did that, that kind of signaled to me that he wanted to play the move b4, because I couldn't quite imagine why he did it, because this pawn was not being attacked. Okay, black continued with c5. Very good move. And here, another middle game idea for you. Follow your plan. If you put your rook on b1 with the idea of playing b4, unless your opponent stops you, or if you realize you've made a mistake, follow through with your plan. In the game, it seemed that Daniel was a little confused as to what to do here, and trust me, this is not an easy position to play. That's why we're here just sharing ideas. But in the game, he backed his bishop up. But let's go back to the theory that says, hey, look, if you have a plan and your opponent didn't mess it up, follow through. If it turned out to be the wrong plan, the coaches will fix it for you, or you fix it yourself the next game. So why not play b4? You'd have to be a little careful if they take and you take back with the rook, because with a highlight, you see how you're on the same line as that bishop? You know, so this pawn could move someday and bother you, and there could be some tactics. But What is the idea of playing this way? You've activated your rook. It can go left or right, but that's probably not its best choice. But it is putting pressure on the b7 pawn, so the rook is very active. If you back it up to the original position, to here, you'll see that the rook on b1 isn't doing anything. Open up the game. Follow your plan. Okay, he backed up his bishop with h4, and then after c5, Eric brought his knight back into the game. Queen to e3, pawn a6. Now, why pawn a6? If you're not used to seeing things like this, ask yourself, what square is this pawn controlling? It's controlling the b5 square. Okay, maybe black wants to follow up with b5. So I really like what he's doing here now. He has a plan. Now the rook on b goes to d1. So it looked a little like black was planning better than white in this position. b5, following with his plan, knight to g5. Now, once knight g5 came, the knight left the center, went to the black side of the board, which is signaling an attack. The problem was the white queen gets bothered very quickly. Now, you see the knight on d4. Now, why am I saying the queen? Well, this knight is threatening to take a pawn on c2. And if it does, you're going to win a tempo on the queen. You also have to be very, very careful where you move this someday. In the game, the queen went to g3, which was a huge mistake tactically. Now, what's wrong with the move? Well, can't the knight take the bishop, check, winning the queen? You're going to say no because of what piece? Well, there's a knight here, right? Protecting the bishop, defending the bishop. Remove the defender. He played h6. How about in this position, b4? Just kicking the knight to wherever it wants to go, and you're probably going to win this piece for free. Or the knight, because you definitely don't want to lose your queen. So after h6 that was played, the knight took in the middle, and here you don't have the same option as b4 because this knight is attacking the queen already. So in the game, he simply took, and he took with his knight. So now this threat on this side of the board was gone. I'm only going to show you a couple of more moves because the main part of the game that I wanted to get across is pretty much over. They made a fair trade up here, and there was one more tactical mistake. Here, white played the move queen f3, where again, can you guys find an alternative for white based on what we're talking about? Is there a way to improve a piece for white? Did you find knight to d5? Yeah, this is an outpost square. It's a gorgeous square. Very hard to get rid of this knight. Black could jump their knight in the center, threatening to take the bishop and win the queen. So this would become really exciting quickly. After queen f3, so again, knight d4 looks pretty good here. Black played b4, and the knight jumped to where it wanted to go anyway. And then a5. After a5, queen to g4. So there's just like a lot of bouncing around with the queen. But this is a sneaky queen move by Daniel. It's on the same line as the black king. So if this queen were not here, you could play knight takes bishop check, winning a piece for free. Pawn a4. Rook went back to a1, so it looked like Daniel was a little confused as to what was going to open up. Pawn to b3, pawn takes is a mistake because here in this position we have the opportunity to play rook takes rook, attacking the queen. And once the queen takes back, there was the chance to take a free piece up here on f6. Okay? I'm going to leave it at here, guys, because we're at that magical 20-minute mark. You can watch these videos in 2 steps. I'll put it in the blog, because if you wait till the end of this video for me to say that, you'll say, why didn't you tell me at the beginning? All right, my friends, I hope you learned something.